the last of the seven ancient wonders, was built in the city that had given birth to them all, Alexandria.
Founded by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, it was the world's first metropolis. Standing at the head of the Nile, it rivaled ancient Rome in size and power. From its earliest days, the city has been a melting pot of civilizations.
You could find any product from India, from Italy, from Greece, from Africa.
Most of the goods for Alexandria's markets were brought by sea. As traders approached the Egyptian coast, they kept a lookout for the familiar sight of Alexandria's wonder, beckoning them to safe harbour. Known as the Pharos, it was a lighthouse. Standing over 400 feet high, it was the world's first skyscraper.
Lighthouses had been built around the Mediterranean from as early as the 7th century BC.
The waters off Egypt were particularly treacherous, hiding submerged rocks that had brought many ships to grief.
It could be argued that the Pharos is perhaps the most utilitarian of all the seven wonders. It actually has ostensibly this practical function of guiding ships into the harbour of Alexandria.
But the Pharos was more than a beacon. It had another function.
Here we have a tower which expresses the power and control and prestige of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the kings of Egypt of the time.
Alexandria was the first megacity. Palaces were stacked upon palaces, yet the Pharos exceeded everything else.
It is yet another way in which Alexandria can be put at least one notch, and preferably several notches, above every other city in the world.
Built during the reign of Ptolemy II, the Pharos announced to the world the grandeur of Alexandria. Designed by the architect Sostratus of Cnidus, it took 12 years to construct. At the top, a vast furnace was kept raging. It blasted its golden light 50 miles out to sea. Some reports mention extraordinary solar mirrors used to laser enemy ships at sea. The Pharos was built in 3 sections. On the base sat a square tower, 233 feet tall. The second section was octagonal, and above it was the lighting apparatus. It's believed a spiral rampway inside allowed donkeys to take up the loads of fuel.
We know that it did have ramps inside it, and that donkeys, for instance, could perhaps have gone up to the top of it on these ramps carrying loads. But it's a bit of an open question as to exactly how it worked, I think.
The light at the top was created by a furnace. It was directed out to sea via large bronze reflectors.
One of the problems, of course, of a lighthouse, particularly in a location such as Egypt, which is relatively poor in trees, in wood, would be what do you actually use to feed the flames?
Alexandria was the largest port in the Greek world, and it is likely that the city had access to many raw materials. Various fuels have been suggested, ranging from wood and oil to fats and tree resins. The Pharos was built from solid blocks of granite and limestone. Unlike tall buildings of today, its walls had to bear all the weight of the masonry above.
Modern buildings have very thin outer skins, sometimes entirely glass, and the walls themselves carry no weight at all. This is achieved by using a frame. I'm holding on to one of the steel stanchions here, so the ground floor and the interior can be entirely open. Frame technology was only invented relatively recently with the advent of modern materials like steel and concrete. Because the ancients were limited to stone, they had to build enormously thick and heavy walls to reach the heights that they wanted.
In the 19th century, Jules Bordet, a forerunner of Eiffel, made the most ambitious copy of the Pharos. Although never built, he incorporated a metal frame into his design for a tower to light up Paris. Built entirely from stone, it is unclear how the Pharos could stand so tall. Yet there are many ancient accounts of it.
The Pharos of Alexandria is actually one of the better documented of the Seven Wonders. It ceased to be a lighthouse at the end of the classical period, but it went on to be used as a mosque. In fact, what they did was on the top where the lantern had been, they built a mosque. There are Arab historians who had climbed it and give very good detailed descriptions with dimensions. So we can be fairly sure that it really was as it's described.
Today, a medieval castle stands on the site of the Pharos, which stood until 1303. Named after the small island on which it was built, Pharos has become a generic word for all lighthouses. Like the Mausoleum and Colossus, the Pharos was destroyed by an earthquake. For 700 years, its remains lay on the seabed. But recently, a marine archaeologist has begun bringing to the surface the world wonder that has remained hidden for centuries. When the Pharos was toppled into the sea, its massive building stones were scattered across the harbor. Marine archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur has been excavating the underwater site. He still can't comprehend the scale of his discovery.
When for the first time we dived, we couldn't imagine such chaotic and huge underwater collection of such thousands and thousands of columns, of bases of columns, of capitals, of sphinxes, of obelisks and so on. It was incredible. And every time we dive, even now, after thousands of diving here, we go back to the surface with a strange feeling. It's a fantastic sight. You cannot imagine, you cannot describe it. You have to dive to have this so strange feeling.
Among his discoveries was a vast granite lintel weighing 75 tons, which he believes to be a supporting beam from the Pharos.
You can see even in this castle, they used some very strong stones like the red granite from Aswan. You see at the base of the windows or the frame of the doors, they used ancient pieces of granite or columns even in the masonry, exactly like the pieces we are in the underwater site, to reinforce the building itself. So we are on the place here, on the underwater site. This is a slip from where we jump into the water.
Jean-Yves has been diving here since 1991. The vast underwater site covers 5 acres. His team continues to log the size and weight of every block.
Deciphering the thousands of artifacts is a monumental task. The Pharos fell amongst palaces and the other treasures of the once great city. So Jean-Yves and his team have a painstaking task of deduction. Using inflatable parachutes, they lift the huge obelisks and statues weighing many tons.
One day they hope to establish once and for all how the Pharos was constructed. the world's tallest lighthouse was brought down by an earthquake. Nowadays, tall buildings are thoroughly tested. Gavin Davis examines the stability of the Pharos.
There's no doubt this would have been a very challenging structure to build, but to build something that's supposedly 400 feet tall or more would have been very difficult at that time. When comparing the Pharos with one of the Great Pyramids, for example, you can see that there's a great difference because the pyramids are inherently more stable structure. Comparing it to something like a pyramid, which would have a much wider base, then it really is still a very tall and thin building.
Whereas the ancients were building into the unknown, today's architects are required to check every uncertainty.
This building's the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, and a significant amount of testing was carried out to look at how it might behave in the wind. The computer these days allows us to eliminate even the most unlikely problem areas from buildings, which means that we can design closer to the edge and design buildings that perform better.
Today's architectural wonders stand within the safeguards of science and technology. The seven wonders have become icons of the ancient world. They stood not solely by the laws of science, but by the will of an age determined to build the impossible.
The seven ancient wonders were part of an age of optimism, an attempt to use technology to the limits, to go further than people had ever gone before in creating these massive monumental structures.
Architecture and sculpture continue to pay a debt to the excellence of their construction.